Islamic extremism has infiltrated almost every British institution. Just look at this week's headlines. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, is warning that police are surrendering to Islamists on our streets, allowing mob rule while cracking down on ordinary Brits. And then this. West Midlands Police holding a recruitment drive at a mosque that has previously hosted extremist preachers. Meanwhile, breaking tonight, according to The Times, the mosque helped appoint police chief who was banned the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. Well, you can start to paint a picture here, can't you? And in The Telegraph, another breaking line, the secret dossier reveals the police, this is West Midlands Police again, covered up the threat to Maccabi players. And that was a threat coming from South Asian men in this reports log that they found that said that they might be on their way to cause some kind of violence. That's in The Telegraph. And let's not forget the Met Police in London making up excuses for Islamists shouting for jihad on the streets of London. And it's not just the police, is it? Our prisons have been overrun by these Islamist gangs. And as The Telegraph reported last year, these groups use violence and intimidation to control high-security wings, radicalising ordinary criminals into potential terrorists. Well, former prison governor Ian Acheson warned years ago that separation units were needed because Islamic extremists were turning jails literally into recruitment centres. Yet here we are, with the Muslim prison population increasing significantly over the last 20 years, and authorities are still watching on while that dangerous ideology radicalises more and more people behind bars. And then there's our universities, now becoming hotbeds of radicalisation. The United Arab Emirates, the UAE, has just pulled scholarships for their students studying here in the UK, citing fears of Islamist influence on campuses. This is a Muslim country pulling those scholarships. This is insane. The Muslim Brotherhood, banned or designated a terrorist organisation in many countries, by the way, may operate freely through some of these student societies.
There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
There you go. That was a pretty plain warning years ago, by the way. The foreign minister for the UAE speaking a while back now. And former Prime Minister David Cameron's own review found their ideology acts as a gateway to radical views. But Labour won't ban them. In fact, it still seems determined to come up with anti-Islamophobia laws, which will only lead to an increase in radical Islamist extremism, won't it? And don't forget our schools. The Trojan horse scandal in Birmingham exposed hardline Islamists trying to impose conservative teachings, sidelining music, drama and anything not fitting their worldview. And investigations found undue religious influence. And the warnings were ignored for years in the name of, you guessed it, community cohesion. What does that remind you of? Even some charities and mosques aren't immune. Foreign funding from places promoting Wahhabi ideology has poured in, hosting extremist preachers and literature. This isn't about, by the way, ordinary British Muslims, the vast majority who reject this ideology, by the way. This is about a small group of militant people exploiting our tolerance, our institutions, our very British values of fairness and free speech to push an agenda that rejects democracy, women's rights, and completely fails at integration. I would also add that moderate Muslims need to speak out more because silence is compliance. And how much longer do we let this go on for? How many more police forces are being guided and effectively co-opted by Islamist extremists? How many more prisons turned into jihadi training grounds? How many more young minds are going to be poisoned on campuses? How long is it before we become the next Islamic Republic just like Iran? Because it only takes a small group of people. The Iranians will tell you that. We need serious radical leadership that confronts this head on. The Muslim Brotherhood must be banned in Britain. Moderate Muslims need to actually show they're taking this seriously. Mosques need to be regulated like they do in Arab nations, and we must denaturalise and deport people that hate our way of life. We're getting to a point where there's not many options left. Britain is a tolerant country, but tolerance of intolerance is suicide, and national suicide is the path we're on.
We're living in a time of what feels like pretty significant social change, and it makes us question things that we've even taken for granted for decades. And one of those at the moment that people are wondering about is actually money. Is the money in your bank account safe? Should you be investing elsewhere? Are we looking at a potential global crash? What will it mean for your savings? Is there a way that you could be using your money that might be outside of government control even? Well, TallyMoney is potentially one solution. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by the CEO and founder of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. What is TallyMoney?
Well, at TallyMoney, you basically get gold you can spend. So we give people an individual account in their name, everyday account. They get a sort code, an account number. They use that account just like they would pounds from their bank, but it's milligrams of gold that we brand as Tally.
Okay. Why would you do that, though? What is the benefit to the customer instead of just having a normal pound sterling account?
Gold's performance against the pound is above 11% per annum over the last 25 years on average. But we still need money in our daily lives, and we have savings. We know that it's good common sense and prudent to save up for things, not just live in credit. You know, whether it's a holiday or a rainy day, your retirement planning, you need to have money in your life, basically, that you can rely on, that's dependable, that nobody meddles with, that nobody can weaponise against you, which is another element of government control when it's the government currency, which we could talk about another time. And it should be pretty simple and straightforward, and that's what we deliver at Tally. And really, we just want people to feel safe and happy with their money. There was a time when the bigger your bank balance, the more confident you felt. Now it's like, I need to do something with it. I can't leave it there. In Tally, you can.
Okay, brilliant. Cameron Parry from TallyMoney, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.
All right, I'll come straight to my panel here. Lauren, I'll start with you. I always feel like the Tory government didn't do enough while it was in power to tackle this issue, particularly in our prisons, which I think is a really bad training ground for jihadis now in Britain. Do you think the Labour government is doing enough?
OK, who owns Harrods?
I'm not sure anyway. What used to be
What's one of the largest airlines to fly into the United Kingdom?
Oh, the Qataris. Correct. Yes.
That's why it wasn't designated as a terrorist organisation after the 2014 review, which reported fully in 15. There was strong lobbying from the Qataris to say, no, don't designate this as a terrorist organisation, which had been on the cards for the 14-15 review. It wasn't just, is this, an extreme ideology? Is this a terrorist organisation?
Right.
To which the review said, no, it is not. And there was significant lobbying, particularly from the Qataris, around that. Qatari influence is absolutely vast. You see it in the US at the moment. The Qataris have bought the Kennedy Trump Center in Washington and are saying that a room that was dedicated to a previous Israeli president or prime minister now has to be renamed for a Muslim leader rather than an Israeli one. You see this absolutely everywhere. There is a problem with Qatari influence being purchased in large parts of the world that prevents us from saying things in public because we need the foreign direct investment coming into the UK.
Well, I think that says a lot about the position we are in Britain. Before I come to you, Christian and Paul, I just want to bring in, we've got a guest joining us from the UAE, political analyst Ahmed Al-Amari. Ahmed, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Such a pleasure to have you on the show. How has the UAE tackled extremism? Because it's very embarrassing for Britain when we've got headlines like the UAE's pulling scholarships because you're worried about Islamist extremism in Britain. How have you guys dealt with it over there?
So, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. In my opinion, the UAE approached Islamist extremism early as an institutional and ideological challenge. So it focused on governance. Now, clear legal boundaries were established from day one. So funding streams were monitored and educational and religious spaces were regulated. Now, political Islam was treated as a structured movement that grows through institutions when boundaries are weak. Now, moving on to the international aspect, the UAE has shared this framework. We never hid this blueprint for the West. We use this through cooperation and policy exchange. Now, the core lesson is very simple and it's clear. Institutions need authority. So universities, charities, and civic spaces need clear rules and boundaries like transparency and enforcement. So extremist movements start to lose influence when they cannot embed themselves inside legitimate institutions.
Ahmed, what do you think should be done here in the UK? We are seeing this incredible rise of Islamist extremism here in Britain. How should we be tackling it? Should we be following the UAE's playbook?
It has been clear since day one. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, has been saying it for years, and we have been mentioning it for years, and we have been repeating this on and on and on. Now, I would like to pose a question back. Why are Western governments still debating frameworks while institutional capture is already visible on campuses? And why do universities prioritize procedural comfort over enforcing authority and protecting academic space? And when a workable model and a blueprint like the UAE's blueprint for containing ideological movements has been demonstrated in plain sight for years, why is it treated as an optional insight rather than just a practical guidance?
Yeah, it's quite bonkers to many Brits as well, Ahmed, by the way. Many of us are scratching our heads as to how this has happened to Britain. Why do you think this has happened to the United Kingdom? Have you got any opinion as to why that might be?
Now, to be honest, I'd like to use also a personal aspect, because there was a time where British and Irish universities were elite institutions. They were, let's say, the global gold standard. And I know that personally, because at one point I was planning on studying in the UK myself. But today, I wouldn't even recommend these environments to students, because let's look at it through an ecosystem lens, if you will. Governments can spend years talking about stopping someone from planting a tree. Now, networks have grown roots across student politics, activist structures, and campus governance. So in a way, these radical extremist Islamists have bluffed the West, basically. They have been playing this game for years and years, while the West has been thinking of, oh, how can I stop them from planting a tree? Well, sorry to say this, but they have a whole rainforest, a whole ecosystem, whereas you're just like to look at the small dot on the big page. Now, universities offer young minds legitimacy and future influence. So that makes them the natural scouting and incubation spaces for disciplined Islamist movements. Now, if you don't mind, from public reporting and discussions, concerns have surfaced around universities and cities such as Birmingham, Manchester, and parts of London, as well as major campuses in Ireland as well. Now, I'm not accusing institutions as a whole. I'm just pointing to a recurring pattern that appears across systems. Now, to have a UAE aspect to it, this is a security and responsibility assessment. The question is whether an environment protects education or enables ideological recruitment under the label of activism. In my view, that distinction explains that concern.
Yeah, well, it's very concerning to us, and it's really good to get your opinion on this, Ahmed, because, you know, when people look at a Muslim country like the UAE and go, how on earth are you telling us we've got an Islamist extremism problem here in Britain? It really does make people wake up and wonder. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. Please come back again soon. That's Ahmed Al-Ameri, the political analyst from the UAE. I'll come back to my panel here. Paul, it seems to many people, and many of our viewers will say, that Labour has a problem addressing this issue. They seem they seem to be, they were kicking and screaming, dragged kicking and screaming to have the rape gang inquiry. Now again, we seem to be more focused on sort of challenging AI-generated images than we are tackling radical Islamism.
Well, I reject that completely, actually. And I can remember working for the previous Labour government just after 7/7, working with the counter-terrorism minister, where she, for example, said that the government should not engage with the Muslim Council for Britain because it was deemed extremist. A lot of money was put into supporting women's organisations within Muslim communities, different strands of Islam that were non-violent, so the Sufis and the Ahmadiyyas and so on, and then tackling this ideology head on. So I think that there's been a long story in our country of us trying to tackle this. Now, occasionally and horribly, you know, institutions are captured. So I'm thinking of the West Midlands Police's actions in the last few weeks with the question of Maccabi fans coming to the UK. I think Craig Guilford needs to go over that, by the way, and perhaps some of the other senior leadership as well. But I mean, it's constant vigilance, and it's constant education too, so we understand what it is we are talking about when we're talking about Islamism.
Christian, do you think the Labour government got an issue with dealing with Islamism in the UK?
Well, I think they do, but it increasingly makes no sense for them not to deal with it. I think for a very long time, the Labour Party felt worried that if it tried confronting some of these very profound and structural issues, that it would lose votes. Now, of course, we see that they are losing votes to, Islamist independent MPs, and actually, unless they tackle it, they will lose more seats. So there is a political incentive now for Labour to try and deal with this. A fascinating discussion, because I've always thought it would be very sensible for a government of any colour to commission a top-to-bottom review of this matter from Middle Eastern countries, because I think they are not just more authoritative, but perhaps are better able to put forward more radical solutions that might be necessary than British politicians that might be uncomfortable or scared of seeming like they're demonising. If it's coming from, a Muslim majority country itself, I think it would help spread that message. But clearly there is an issue, and specifically on the police. I think the fundamental issue is that the police have become far, far too concerned about prioritising community cohesion and avoiding riots, and of course they need to. But if preventing outbreaks of riots and protests is put ahead of doing the right thing, then we get into a problem, because then the largest group in many communities will be, Muslim over Jewish. Then regardless of how distasteful and radical and extremist that vocal minority Muslim view is, it will be the Jews that are told, stay at home, protect yourself, let's put, armed security around mosques, rather than dealing with
a lot of the problem with
issue.
this, though, comes down to the very concept of policing by consent in this country, which is the bedrock of what policing was founded on, but it doesn't match up to the modern requirements of policing. But in order to change it, we need to alter one of the fundamental tenets of our police forces, which is policing by community consent.
Yes, but who are these community spokesmen as well? How often do we hear the police have consulted with community leaders?
Who are these them? I want to be a community leader. I'd love to direct some forces around Britain.
Of the Islamic faith in general is a lack of singular leadership, like the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury. It just doesn't exist in the religion in the same way.
Well, that's true. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. West Midlands Police has not commented further on fresh allegations, but in a previous statement, the force said this: a huge amount of planning went into the operation with the aim of preventing crime and disorder and disruption to the game and keeping everyone safe. The operation achieved its aims of keeping everyone in attendance safe, and this is down to the hard work of all the officers and staff from West Midlands Police and other forces around the country. We contacted Green Lane Masjid and Community Centre, and previously they said this: GLMCC was contacted by WMP as part of routine community engagement, in the same way that the Jewish community and other groups were engaged. In any engagement between Green Lane Masjid and West Midlands Police has been routine, transparent and focused solely on safeguarding all Birmingham residents and maintaining public order. It does not amount to endorsement of nor influence over operational policing decisions. To imply otherwise is misleading.